smell of flowers, the hope that warm weather will soon be upon us, the knowledge that with each passing day a little more light comes into our lives as a sort of promise that these long days of winter will soon be over. I mean, what's not to love about spring? But I should probably admit something to you. I don't know if I just dozed off or have a mild case of amnesia, but I have to confess, I don't really remember this past winter very well. Come to think of it, the end of 2010 is all sort of a blur to me. And by blur, I really mean, like, blank. Nothing. Nada. As in, I don't remember anything. The last thing I remember, we were planning for Arts Night. We were going to be raking up leaves after church. We had a busy couple of weeks with the church conference and Consecration Sunday, and I was looking forward to Thanksgiving. Oh man, I miss Thanksgiving! That's one of my favorite holidays. It's centered around food and family and giving thanks. And has the added bonus of not having any liturgical responsibilities. But I guess that means I missed Christmas too. Sorry. And New Year's and Epiphany and my birthday and Valentine's Day. Oh man, Valentine's Day. Sorry. But hey, it's spring, so flowers are abundant. Friends, I'm sorry, I'm not usually like this. I normally remember things. And to tell you the truth, I didn't realize there was a problem until just a moment ago. You see, it happened when Alan was reading the scripture lesson. I guess I should probably call a doctor or something, because I don't remember entering a wormhole or swallowing a red pill, but that has to be the only explanation, because I know that this morning's scripture is definitely only read one time a year. I'm no dummy. Even I know the crucifixion is something we tuck away, we talk about only on special occasions, or occasion, on Good Friday. And then we jump to Easter and are done with it. So today must be Good Friday. Well, I guess even on the off chance that I'm wrong, the story of the cross is probably worth telling no matter what day it is. And so today, on this beautiful spring, or perhaps still fall morning, on this Good Friday, or perhaps still the Sunday before Thanksgiving, we pause so that we might hear a familiar story and remember together the cross. We find ourselves today in Luke's version of the crucifixion account. And as we've come to expect from following along in Luke's Gospel, it's a little different than some of the other accounts. Yes, it has the basics still. There's the betrayal, the questioning before Pilate, the walk towards that place of the skull, and of course the actual crucifixion alongside two gentlemen of ill repute. Luke calls them criminals, while others call them bandits. Okay, so far, there's not much difference between Luke and at least his synoptic brothers, Matthew and Mark. John, of course, is another story, but he always is. No, what's different in Luke is whose voice is heard. You see, in all of the other gospel accounts, the criminals are either silent or are said to have joined in on the mocking. But in Luke, the criminals' voices are central. Perhaps this was Luke's way of reminding us at the end of Jesus' ministry of what Jesus had been trying to communicate since the very beginning, which is, of course, that everyone's voice deserves to be heard. Everyone's voice deserves to be heard. And when we fail to listen to those around us, we run the risk of losing an important part of the story. This is certainly a lesson we can afford to hear today. After all, we live in a world in which we quickly tune out the voices of those with whom we disagree. I want to listen, but he's a Republican, or a Democrat, or too young, or too old, or gay, or straight, or whatever else we might use to separate ourselves in this world. But here, in arguably the most important passage in all of Scripture, the truth comes from an unexpected place. And truth, friends, is from God, no matter where it comes from. In other words, because each of us is a child of God, all of our voices matter. Plus, after having seen who Jesus spent his time with in life, is it any wonder who he ends up literally hanging out with in death? And so, as we remember the passage today, we will do our best to not forget the voice of the criminals. As our passage begins, Jesus has arrived at the place of the skull, Golgotha, and is being crucified next to these two criminals. And in our story, Jesus is the first to speak. We're told that as he's being crucified, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." Now, this verse is a little controversial for a couple reasons. The first, of course, is that we don't know if it's actually supposed to be there. You see, it isn't in most of the early manuscripts of Luke. And most scholars agree that it was probably added by some later scribe. That being said, it is completely consistent with who Jesus was and how he called us to live. Which leads us to the second challenge with this verse, which is, of course, the idea itself. You see, the idea that Jesus was forgiving the people who were killing him is a bit problematic for us. Here he is being nailed to the cross, facing certain death and public humiliation, and he's asking for forgiveness for those who, in their ignorance, are committing a violent act against him. Clearly, he hasn't been reading his comic books. The hero is supposed to fight back, to give it the old college try, to put on a cape and to stalk around at night seeking revenge. No wonder they don't believe he's king of the Jews. A king would fight. But here he is taking it, and not only taking it, but asking for forgiveness on their behalf. What gives, Jesus? No, friends, if we're honest, we have to admit that the real reason we're uncomfortable with this passage is because in our hearts we know that's how we're called to live as well. In other words, perhaps the reason why we save passages like this for Good Friday and Good Friday alone is because we don't like to be reminded of what we so often fail to do. After all, it's much easier for us to hold grudges. When someone does something wrong to us, we prefer to get even. We want to show others that we're not someone to be messed with. And so we display our power in the form of retribution or revenge. We do this both as individuals and as a country. As we were discussing in one of my classes this week at seminary, this is how we end up justifying sinful acts like torture in the name of justice. It's perfectly possible to rationalize, but in the end, it's just not Christian. In the course of that class this week, we discussed the incident a few years ago when the gunman broke into the Amish schoolhouse and killed 5 children before killing himself. It was an abhorrent, sinful, and inexcusable act. And if ever a community had reason for vengeance, it was theirs. But instead of fighting violence with more violence, they responded with love. Their community went to the man's funeral. They brought meals to his family. And they comforted his wife and children. It didn't mean that they didn't feel the loss or suffer the consequences. They did. But in the end, they recognized the truth that loving forgiveness was a better way to honor their children's lives and their lives of faith than violence. In other words, friends, they remembered the cross. They remembered the radical message of the cross, which is that from despair can come hope. That from pain can come healing, and that from death, most of all, can come new life. But it doesn't come easy. No, it takes work. A life of faith, living as a Christian person, takes work, and it's really hard. But in the end,